Yes, right, that there had to be, like you said, a ridiculous argument, right, for how that happened to be. And when we think about, you know, the lack of actual scientific thinking that was available, that the arguments that they came up with in that scene are about as good as any other argument you might be able to come up with, right? How did they sort of try to mimic scientific thinking?
They dressed her up as a witch and tried to use that as proof against her that she was a witch when they in fact kind of wasn't a dress as one.
Yeah, they kind of messed with the evidence a little bit, so to speak, right? They were making what they wanted, you know, making their data or anything that they had to support their theory, you know, fit the outcome. What else did they use that sort of dressed up some scientific thinking? What's that?
The duck.
The duck. And what did that, how could that have been scientific, or how could that be a dressed up version of it?
They thought that if she weighed the same as a duck, that meant that she was made out of wood and would burn like a witch.
Right. So obviously we know that's not true, right? Some of the other thinking that they had was drowning witches, right? What happened if you drowned a witch and she died?
And she wasn't a witch.
She wasn't a witch, right? She's dead, but she was innocent. If you tried to drown her and she didn't die, then she's a witch and she would be killed, right? Not a great time to be suspected of witchcraft. Okay. All right, so that's just sort of something to get you guys thinking about scientific thinking and flawed scientific thinking and how easy it can be to have it flawed, right? It doesn't take much sometimes to get off base and sort of see things from a less valid perspective. All right, so when we finished up last time, we finished up with Freud's psychosexual stages of development, right? And we talked about how issues that arise maybe during those stages or aren't resolved can cause personality issues down the road a little bit. Any questions on any of that? Okay, so there's a little bit more on Freud I want to get into today, and then we're going to move forward into another of the modern perspectives. So what is the current perspective that we're talking about? I say Freud, but what's the name of the modern perspective we're doing right now? Psychoanalysis. Okay. All right. So Sigmund Freud, like we talked about last time, is the main contributor to this field of psychoanalysis. We talked about the id and ego and superego and how they develop. And today I want to talk a little bit about what Freud called defense mechanisms. Is everybody or anybody familiar with the term of a defense mechanism? Yeah? What do we think it is?
Fight or flight.
That is
internal responses to things that you must react.
Okay, right. Fight or flight is an interesting way to put it, because that's a body defense mechanism, right? We gotta run or we have to fight. And in the same way, we can talk about doing that with our psyche. Some things have to be addressed, and some things maybe we would run from. Is that what you're saying? Sure. Okay. All right. So sometimes there are things that can happen to a person that, and this is different for different people, right? That Freud thinks, or a psychoanalyst would think, maybe we can't really handle, it's too anxiety producing or too upsetting. So we would use what he called a defense mechanism. So that's really the ego's way of sort of protecting itself, reducing anxiety, and in a way it distorting reality. It's telling yourself a little bit of a lie in order to protect yourself. So it's the ego's way of protecting itself so that we don't have a psychotic break.
Pushing it like away, like into the back of your mind is not a defense mechanism.
That is one of them, and that's the first one we're going to do, and that is called, you know?
Repression.
Repression. Very good. Okay. So repression. So it means to repression means literally to repress something. To Freud would say to banish any anxiety related or arousing thoughts, feelings, or memories from our consciousness. So, say on your way to school today, you drove by a car accident. Could that be upsetting, anxiety producing for some people? Depending on the person, what you saw, what you're thinking about, right? For some people more than others. So if you're the type of person, or if for some reason you saw something in this accident that was particularly upsetting to yourself, maybe you'd been in an accident yourself recently and that this brought back some really bad memories or something like that, your ego, your psyche might choose to repress those memories. So what would that mean? If I'm going to take them out of my conscious experience,
Sounds like forgetting about it.
yeah, sort of like forgetting about them, right? I'm pushing them right down into my unconscious. I'm not going to let them, I'm not going to think about them. I'm not going to let them enter my conscious thought. And that's what it means to repress something, to push it down into your unconscious. Make sense? Okay, all right. Another defense mechanism is something called regression. So,
Playing like an innocent, like going back to like baby talk and pretending like, I don't know, I'm innocent.
yeah, right. So, what does it mean to regress? Literally.
Backwards or go back?
What's that?
To go backwards.
To go backward, right? That's to regress. So when Freud's talking about regression in terms of these defense mechanisms, we talked about the different psychosexual stages, right, that we go through. If we are faced, so if we're an adult, we're faced with anxiety or some anxiety-producing situation or some situation that makes us feel very uncomfortable, we could regress back to one of those earlier stages. So you said like baby talk and right, things like that. So that might be like back to even the oral stage, right? What if we are regressing back? All right. Say in my private practice, I have a patient and your diagnosis is like a general anxiety disorder. Like they're an anxious person. That's what general anxiety disorder is. Okay? And they are certain events in their lives that trigger anxiety. So maybe they're going through, they're changing jobs, which can be anxiety producing for anybody, right? And this particular patient is already anxious about things, so they're feeling very, very anxious about this. Very anxious, very insecure. So with all this coming up and all these potential things happening, I noticed that my patient has started sucking their thumb. Right? So what psychosexual stage would a person suck their thumb during, according to Freud? Probably the oral stage, right? And what would it be in reaction to? Remember we said during the oral stage some things can go a little wrong that might lead to some trust issues later or anxiety issues later, right? Like being weaned or, going from maybe the breast to a bottle or just being weaned in general onto solid foods that caused the baby to feel what? Abandoned, right? And therefore uncomfortable, anxious, not soothed, all those things. So sucking your thumb is a soothing thing, right? If you no longer have the nipple or the bottle, you go to your thumb or whatever it is, pacifier maybe for some kids. Okay, so later on in life, this patient, when faced with these anxiety-producing circumstances like a big change in career, may, in order to deal with that anxiety, regress back to that stage and start sucking his or her thumb again. Does that make sense? Okay. What else could have been a sign that my patient was regressing? Sucking your thumb is sort of major as an adult, right? As something to start doing again, even in private. But what other regression might you see back to an oral stage? What do you guys think? What else did they focus on? What about eating problems, either overeating or being restrictive with eating, right? During the oral stage, we're looking for nutrition, and they're learning about getting nutrition orally, right? Chewing food, eating food. So eating issues, either being restrictive or overeating when you're faced with anxiety, that's something that's a sign that somebody could have regressed a bit. What else, maybe? What are some things people might do when they're stressed out? Does anybody bite their nails? Okay, that's a big one, right? Freud would say that is regressing, sort of that's dealing with anxiety, finding a way to cope with anxiety, a little bit from the oral stage. Smoking cigarettes is like an oral thing. It's got other, obviously, drug benefits as well, but that same idea. Chewing gum, chewing on your lip, chewing on the inside of your cheek, people do, right? All those sorts of things, people dealing with anxiety. So those could all be sorts of defense mechanisms. Okay? All right, so that's repression, regression. The next one that we're talking about is something called reaction formation. Reaction formation is sort of think about as like almost like a fake it till you make it sort of thing. Have you ever been super nervous about something, maybe having to get up in front of a class and give a presentation, or if you did sports, maybe like a big game, big performance, something like that, and you're super nervous about it, but instead of sort of letting yourself admit that you're nervous, what might you do or say? Has anybody ever said they're fine when they're not? Okay, that's reaction formation, right? No, I'm not nervous, I'm excited. Or no, I'm not upset. That didn't bother me. I'm totally fine. That's reaction formation. It's telling yourself that you're fine, or fine when you're not, right? Excited when you're nervous, happy when you're sad. It's convincing yourself, really, that you're the opposite of what you're feeling. Why would you want to do that?
Because you don't want to go out on stage nervous.
Right? Because that could do what?
You also don't want to seem vulnerable to people around you. Like if you get into an argument, you say you're fine because you don't want the other person to see you.
Right? You want to be, you're not feeling fine, you're feeling vulnerable, right? Is vulnerable a good way to feel? No, it's a little bit scary, right? It's uncomfortable. So our ego says, no, I'm fine, right? Is sad a good way to feel? Usually? No, so what do we tell ourselves? Happy. I'm not sad. I'm okay, I can deal with this. This doesn't make me sad, right? That's reaction formation. It's sort of your ego convincing itself that it's the opposite of what you feel, right? It's the safe version of what you actually feel. Okay. Another defense mechanism is something called projection. Does anybody know what it means if I say you're projecting?
It means that
Yeah, you're pushing your problems or your feelings onto somebody else. Why would we do that?
That way we don't have to accept the blame.
Okay, we don't have to accept the blame. We don't have to accept the consequences, because sometimes the consequences can just be your own bad feelings, right? Okay, and then the last one we're talking about is pretty straightforward. That would be rationalization. What does it mean to rationalize something?
Rationalize what you're doing to make it seem normal.
Yes, normal can be tricky, right? Somebody in Anne-Marie, what's something that we might rationalize? Okay, say it's a nice day, it's Friday, right? It's a nice day. And you've got a big test on Monday, right? And so you know that you should not wait till Sunday night to cram it all in and to study, right? You should study a little bit every day. But it's super nice out and you'd much rather like go this afternoon and go for a bike ride and do something fun and enjoy the day, right? How could you rationalize that to yourself? Like what might you tell yourself?
Like, it's like, I guess kind of saying, like those things are like, when it's a good day, so you want to do it now instead of when it's not. Or how to
Yep, that's a rationalization, right? I gotta take advantage of the weather while it's good, right? Is it like, I mean, is that entirely true? Is it like, are we ever gonna have another nice day again? You know, I'm sure we will, right? So, but we can rationalize just about anything. Well, I do better when I learn the material closer to the test date. Or, you know, I haven't exercised much lately and that's good for me. And that gets that's good for your brain, right? Exercise will get me in a better mood or I'll be able to focus better when I do study or something like that, right? We can rationalize doing just about anything if we need to or want to, right? Could you rationalize, you know, blowing off class or spending more money than is in your budget for something, or, you know, I mean, all these things that we feel like we shouldn't do either because we think that or society says we shouldn't do it. But are we capable of thinking of reasons that we should do them? Nobody ever rationalizes anything?
Speeding,
Okay,
going above the speed limit.
right, you could rationalize that. You could rationalize anything, I think. So, does that make sense to people? So why do we do it? Why not just say, I'm blowing off studying because I want to, right? Because my id says I should. Why do we rationalize?
Makes you feel better.
Yeah, it makes you feel better, right? That's all. That's the whole point of these defense mechanisms, is to make us feel better. It doesn't have to be like it's not always some big, scary, traumatic event, right? It's just so we feel better. That's what the ego needs to do to protect itself, right? That's what we need to do to protect ourselves, to make ourselves feel better. Okay. All right. So, what do you guys think about psychoanalytic perspective as a field, as a theory?
Isn't it starting to be proved that like Freud had the right idea of things like that when it came to like the development of children?
Freud had some good ideas. He also had some not great ideas, right? What do you guys think some of his better ideas might have been? Do you agree with anything that we've learned? defense mechanisms. They exist, right? I've certainly used all of them, I'm sure. What else?
The ego and superego.
You think that's, you could see that? Okay. Do you guys agree? Do you see that, like, those parts of our personality could be there? That could be contributing to how we do things? Who thinks that they could see that? Id, ego, and superego sort of being a thing, okay?
I just have a question. Do we use like defense mechanisms even though, because we know like subconsciously what the right decision is, so we just try to like use these different ways of making it make sense for us, or is it?
It's not really a conscious process that we're using them, so yeah. It's how our ego fixes things so that we're consciously comfortable, but it's usually an unconscious thing. If we're particularly self-aware, we could catch ourselves, rationalizing and things like that, but usually we try not to, because if we catch ourselves, then what are we doing? Dealing with, sort of defeating the point of it, right? Because then it's like, oh, I knew that and I rationalized that, so then we have to go through and face it again. What else? Anybody agree with anything else Freud might have thought? Okay, what about disagree?
Like the Oedipus and then the Electra concept.
We're not all crazed little sex maniacs?
Yeah.
Yep, I think a lot of people can agree. Okay, good. What else? When we were talking about dreams, right? We talked about dream analysis, and Freud thinks that's a little bit of like a way to get at our unconscious and what we're thinking, maybe some wish fulfillment. Do you guys agree with that? Would you say that all the potentially ridiculous, crazy dreams you have are like insight into your unconscious, or are they just that? Are they just sort of data?
I think it's like your brain, like your unconscious.
Doing what?
It like seeps through your dreams when like your brain isn't fully actively like repressing or like hiding it from you. It comes out when you're asleep because your brain's like kind of.
So you agree sort of with Freud on that, that it's a way to let it out. Okay. Does anybody disagree? Everybody agrees with Freud on that?
I think there's more we can discover about it. I think that there is fact behind it, that it's partially right, but I think there's probably more to it.
Sure.
We can learn.
Yeah. I agree. I gotta tell you guys, if every dream that I had was representative of some sort of wish fulfillment, like, I just can't think that that's true. I think that we encounter in the world so much sensory data every day that your brain occasionally needs to like clear it out, right, and organize it. And sometimes it's just that. It's just like sort of a cleaning out a dirty pantry or something like that, you just got to get rid of some stuff that's in there. Okay.
I don't know about the whole wish fulfillment thing, but I think that there is something kind of behind dreams. Maybe it's something you're repressing. Maybe it's feelings you're trying not to feel, trying to push back. Maybe it's just, I don't know. I just think there's more to it than just wish fulfillment. What you want. There's more to it than that. What I believe.
Sure. Yeah.
It's valid.
What about the idea, so basically Freud thinks that we stop developing personality-wise when?
Whenever we reach like young adulthood.
Yeah, like adolescence into young adulthood. Do you guys agree? Do you think that's it? We're done cooking?
I disagree with that.
Okay. Who agrees that we continue to develop throughout life? Okay, so there's a lot of support against Freud for that. When we talked about free association, right? What was that?
Just
Maybe the best way that comes to mind.
Right. So Freud would say that free association, saying that first word that comes to mind, maybe a Freudian slip, right? Like letting out what you're actually feeling or thinking. that that's representative of a true thought or feeling in your unconscious. Would you agree with that? Okay, so if somebody, I think we did this, did someone say the word apple to me, right, to do free association? I can guarantee you that on a different day, I'm gonna say a different thing for apple. Maybe Thanksgiving's coming up and I'm thinking about apple pie, or I'm baking, right? Or I'm thinking about my favorite apple, or I have to go to the Apple store, right? There's gonna be different days that the first thing that comes to mind when you say apple, I'm gonna say a dozen different things. So is that like Freudian, or is that because, you know, we think about things and we've got cognitive stuff going on, right? And so sometimes my verbal answer is just gonna be a cognitive process, right? We have different things happening in our brains at different times. So different words can mean different things to us. I mean, 20 minutes apart, a different word, you know, the same word rather, can mean different things. So there's, I think, some support for some of Freud's theories and some not. I certainly agree that we've got a lot going on in our unconscious, right? If we only had our conscious mind, like I said, we couldn't have a past, we couldn't have a future, there'd be no memory, there'd be no thinking ahead, there'd be nothing to store anything. So we certainly have an unconscious. And we can see that even, I mean, we can prove that now with like brain mapping and, you know, lighting up areas of activity and things, and watching that like technologically. So there's stuff that's true. One of also the big problems, I guess, with psychoanalysis is that he really based a lot of his theories on all the individual patients that he saw, right? So we'll get into research design a little bit next week, but if we base theories based on conversations or clinical relationships we have with one person, is that a very good scientific study? No, right? Like, so if he's basing his theory of, you know, this like oral fixation and regression on one patient that he had, that's not a very valid and reliable study because it's only using one person. It's a case study, right? Okay, all right. So that is what we're going to talk about for psychoanalysis. Any questions on that right now as a school? Okay. The next school of thought that we're going to get into is behavioral school. So if the psychoanalytic school focused on unconscious thought and conflict, what do you guys think the behavioral school is going to focus on? Behavior. Good. Behavioral school is very interested in behavior. So we talked about the definition of psychology as a science. What was that definition? Who can tell me? Behavior.
And cognitive.
Mental processes, right? The scientific study of behavior and mental processes. And when we talked about that definition, we defined behavior. What is a behavior? An action. Yep. So what's an action? Something you do.
Like you walk or you talk.
Yep. What else? What was an important characteristic of a behavior? Those are all right. What can another person do? Yes.
Like the way they act towards you, like if there's mean or other stuff like mean.
What can I do to your behavior? in order to change it,
You could suggest something?
I could suggest it, but in order to know what your behavior is, what do I have to be able to do?
Observe.
I have to observe it, right? A behavior has to be observable. You have to be able to see it. So behavioral psychology is absolutely 100% interested in observable behavior. Another characteristic of behavior that's necessary is that it has to be objective. What did we say objective was?
Like straight facts.
Straight facts, right? We're all gonna be able to agree on it. So if I stand up here, which I'm not gonna do, and did 20 jumping jacks, say, we could all, see me doing that, right? It would be observable. And we would all be able to say what I did, right? So it wouldn't be subjective. What's a subjective something that I could watch? How could you look at my jumping jacks, I should say, subjectively?
If you're doing it correctly.
Yeah, and then it's like, well, what's the definition of correctly? What's the correct form or speed? Should my hands touch or cross or, all those different things? So you could say I did good or bad jumping jacks, right? Correct or incorrect. That gets into subjective thought. So if I stood up here and just did, like I said, 20 jumping jacks, the objective behavior would be that I did 20 jumping jacks. What's another objective behavior somebody could do?
Eating.
I'll give you guys an example of what most of you are doing right now, or when I ask some questions. Objectively, if I had observers up at the front of the room, they would say that many students are averting eye contact with the instructor when you look out, right? So it's like, I ask a question and people are like, you could look this way, you could look this way, you could pretend you're writing, right? There's many objective behaviors we can do to avoid eye contact with an instructor or something like that, okay? Those can be objective behaviors because we can see them and measure them. So if we had observers like behind a double mirror or something like that, they could say, maybe 5 students look down, 5 students look up, 5 students look at nobody really has laptops, things like that. So different objective behaviors that we can measure. Okay, so the behaviors think that it's essential, not just important, but essential, that this is the only thing that we focus on. They're not interested at all in our internal mental processes. Why do you think that they think that? They're only interested in observable, objective, measurable behavior, and they think that's the only thing of importance.
Trying to get rid of bias.
Absolutely, right? Behavioral psychology could be argued to be one of the more scientific approaches. If we introduce subjective thinking, we are introducing bias. That's the definition of subjective thinking, right? So that's part of it. What else? Why do they think? Why are they only interested in this? In behavior?
Because it can be tested.
What's that?
It can be tested over and over again.
Yep, it can be tested, absolutely. We can watch it being tested. It can be increased validity, reduce bias, all that sort of stuff. Keeps it very scientific, right? It takes out that any of that gray area. Okay. All right, so the early behaviorists get their ideas from the idea of classical conditioning. Anybody know what classical conditioning is? And who is it related to?
Pavlov.
Yeah, okay. So, classical conditioning so behaviors, obviously, we said are interested in behavior. They're interested in how we respond to our environment, to stimulus from the environment. So, classical conditioning is sometimes called passive learning. And it's how we react to certain environmental stimuli. So,
Watson also has something to do with classical conditioning.
yeah. So early on, we've got a researcher called Pavlov, and Pavlov has a kennel full of dogs that he's using for some of his scientific research. So obviously, dogs are animals that need to be fed. So every day, his research assistants or whoever he has go into the kennel to feed the dogs. Right? Straightforward, makes sense. When they go into the kennel, they walk through a door, and on the door is one of those little bells, just those tones that goes off as you go through the door. So every day before the dogs get fed, they hear the door open and the bell tone, and then the people come in with their food and they feed them. Okay? Everybody with me? All right. So, the researchers notice that the dogs now, when they come in, are salivating, are drooling when their food's coming. Is that a natural process? Yeah. What do we do? I mean, not if you're a vegetarian, I guess, but what do you do if you like smell bacon or something good that you want to eat?
Your mouth water.
Your mouth waters. Why does our mouth water?
Helps us digest food. Whenever we eat it.
Right. Do you guys know why we salivate? What's in our saliva? Enzymes that break down the food? Okay, so it's a natural biological process that happens. So, it happens with dogs too. So, why are the dogs drooling before the food gets to them?
They know it's coming.
And how do they know it's coming? Somebody else.
They hear the bell.
They hear the bell, and they've learned over time that the bell means what? Food's coming, right? Because it happens every time. So, they notice that the dogs are now salivating not in response to the smell of the food, but in response to what? The bell. Is that a natural process? No, it doesn't make sense, right? Would we salivate randomly in response to a bell? No. What do we do in response to a bell or a tone, most of us?
We wake up. I mean,
Okay.
like an alarm clock bell, we wake up. I mean,
What about if we're just sitting in this room and you hear like a tone? What are most of us gonna do?
jump around.
What?
Look around.
Yeah, you see where it's at. Maybe get up.
Where do tones usually come from for us? Yeah. Most people are like, you check their phone, right? You hear like that little ding from your iPhone or the little vibrate or whatever. So is that a natural process? We learned that too, right? Our iPhones taught us that. That's a scary thing for what we've learned. But so we all are, we learn to respond to things over time. That's why it's called passive learning. Did we try to learn that? We just did, right? Did the dogs actively try to learn to salivate in response to a tone? It just happened, right, as part of a natural process, okay? So that's why this classical conditioning is called passive learning. It's learning that comes about without the learner trying. Okay. All right. So that's where we come up with this idea of classical conditioning. So the behavioral psychologists The main figure that takes classical conditioning and brings it into modern psychology is a guy called John Watson. Okay, so Watson is the figure, is the person that's responsible for classical conditioning as we know it today. So, there's a couple of key elements of classical conditioning that we're going to go through. We're going to use Pavlov's dogs, because that's the example that we just did. So we know that we have food, and the food does what to the dogs?
Salivate.
Makes them salivate. And we know also that paired with that food, we have the bell from the door, right? And what would that bell make the dogs do without the pairing?
Nothing.
Nothing. What does the bell do when we pair it with the food? Cause the dogs to salivate. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to go through and we're going to label these different factors. This can be a little bit tricky, so we'll do a couple examples, but just bear with me. Okay. So the food. Do the dogs need to learn to salivate to the food?
No.
No. Okay. So the food is what we're going to call an unconditioned stimulus. Unconditioned unconditioned means unlearned, right? Conditioning is learning, right? So an unconditioned stimulus is the unlearned stimulus. The UCS is the unconditioned stimulus. Okay. In response to the unconditioned stimulus, the dogs salivate. Did they have to learn that? No. Okay. So is it conditioned or unconditioned? It's unlearned, so it's conditioned or unconditioned?
Condition.
Unconditioned. Okay. And it's in response to the food. So the salivation in response to the food is the unconditioned, what do you think? Response. Good. So unconditioned response, unlearned response. Everybody clear on those two? Okay. What's the bell on its own? Does it mean anything? Does it get a response, the bell on its own, without being paired? No. Okay. So the bell on its own is a neutral stimulus. Yep. Does the neutral stimulus get a response? No. Okay, so the bell on its own is just a neutral stimulus. It's not learned, it doesn't do anything, it doesn't get you anything. Right? Right. Now, when we pair the bell with the food, the bell changes, right? It changes its meaning because now it gets something. What do you think the bell becomes? A conditioned stimulus. Good. So when it's paired with the unconditioned stimulus, you get a conditioned stimulus. Now it means something. And now, does it get you a response? Yes. What kind kind of response do we get from the conditioned stimulus? What's that? A conditioned response, right. Perfect sense? Everybody clear? Yeah? No? Maybe? Okay. Let's do, what time is it? Do we have a couple minutes? No. Okay. We'll end with that for today. Think about this stuff over the weekend, and we don't have class on Monday, so we'll be here Wednesday. I'm going to email a homework assignment. It'll probably be 5 or 10 multiple choice questions, and we'll make that due on Wednesday. You can just email me it'll be a letter response, so that's fine, or you can bring in the written answers on Wednesday. Questions?
Do you want the homework from Wednesday, like everything else?
Yes, if you've got homework that you want to turn in a physical copy of, I will take that. And if you emailed it to me, then that's fine also.
What did you say you wanted to do Wednesday? What did you say you wanted to do Wednesday?
I'm going to send you a couple multiple choice questions.
Okay.
Yep.
The
Homework. Okay. Yeah, if you got homework, guys, I'll take it here.
Feels good. Are you gonna count off for that? I mean, I can